In the first part of this video, we looked at fluid and electrolyte balance. In this second part, we want to take care of talking about acid-base balance. So just to refresh your memory from basic biology, water will constantly break and re-break and reform itself into hydroxide ions and hydrogen ions. Now, hydroxide ions are what we consider to be strong bases. Hydrogen ions are considered to be strong acids. The pH scale is a scale we use to look at how much of a fluid is acidic or how much of it is basic or if it's actually neutral. So the pH of arterial blood is going to be somewhere between 7.35 and 7.45. So it's slightly basic is the way you want to kind of look at that. Now, you don't want your blood to be lower than that or higher than that in terms of pH. This seems to be the Goldilocks, the just right amount of pH. Several mechanisms maintain this range. We have buffering systems, the exhalation of carbon dioxide, the kidney excretion of hydrogen ions. So we'll look at the influence of the lungs and the kidneys and all of these buffering systems in this particular lecture. So we'll start with buffering systems, and buffering systems occur in the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid, and we have several systems that work. One of the systems that works most in the intracellular fluid will be the phosphate buffering system, and we'll talk about that one first. Working both in the intracellular and extracellular fluid, we have protein buffering systems. We're going to look at hemoglobin, amino acids, and just plasma proteins in the plasma of your blood to help regulate pH. And then working mainly in the extracellular fluid, but sometimes in intracellular fluid, is the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system. So let's start with the phosphate buffering system first. This system acts similarly to the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system, and we have talked about this system in previous lectures before, but we'll talk about it in this lecture as well. So we have in this phosphate buffering system, we have dihydrogen phosphate and we have monohydrogen phosphate that are going to be the ions that are going to be active in this particular system. So if we look at dihydrogen phosphate, it's going to work as a weak acid. And so if you have here in this situation hydroxide ions, which are strong bases, and dihydrogen phosphate, which is a weak acid, when these things combine, we form water and we form monohydrogen phosphate, which is a weak base. So if we had a high hydroxide ion content, we could take and buffer that by combining it with the dihydrogen phosphate. So this is just a buffering system to help buffer that. So monohydrogen phosphate works as a weak base. So if we had lots of hydrogen ions, we could absorb those and combine those with monohydrogen phosphate to create dihydrogen phosphate or a weak acid. Okay, so we can take a strong acid and make it weaker by using this particular buffering system. In addition, we could take a strong base and make it a weaker base or neutralize it using this buffering system. The next system is called the protein buffering system, and this is the most abundant in the intracellular fluid and the plasma of the blood. When pH rises, the carboxyl group will dissociate and act like an acid. So just to refresh your memory, amino acids, let's see if I can erase that. So amino acids have an amino group, and they have so this is the amino group, and they have a carboxylic acid or carboxyl group, and there's a variable group, the R group there. So this right here and this right here are going to be really important in this protein buffering system. Now proteins are made of amino acids, and amino acids combine together to form proteins. On one end of a protein you have an amino group, on the other end you have a carboxyl group. And so you can take and add hydrogen ions or remove hydrogen ions. So this acts as a nice little way to decrease or raise blood pH pretty quickly. So when pH rises, the carboxyl group disassociates to act like an acid. So a rise in pH means you're becoming more basic. And so you can see here, here's the amino acid, and here's the carboxyl group releasing a hydrogen ion, so that a rise in pH, when you release a lot of hydrogen ions, that's going to decrease the pH to become more acidic. When pH falls, the free amino group will take up hydrogen ions and act like a base. So the flip side will occur. If you have a lot of hydrogen ions, the amino group will absorb those and attach to those, take them out of circulation, and thus help to buffer the pH. So an amino acid, it can be in a neutral state. It's called a Zwitter-ion at a neutral state. And if pH increases, you can take those hydrogen ions and put them on the carboxyl group. You can put them on the amino group or the R group. So you can take hydrogen ions out of circulation. If pH decreases, you can release hydrogen ions. You can release them from that amino group and from the carboxyl group. That helps to buffer the pH. There are two specialized protein buffer systems that help to maintain the pH of the blood, and those are the plasma protein buffers in the form of albumin. So albumin is made by the liver, put into plasma, and it helps to buffer the pH. There's also the hemoglobin buffer system. The hemoglobin buffer system is really important. Red blood cells are packed with several things. So in addition to talking about the protein buffer, I want to talk about carbonic anhydrase just for a minute, since we're talking about red blood cells. So hemoglobin in red blood cells acts as a buffer. It has the ability to absorb hydrogen ions or release them, depending upon if you have too many of them or too little of them. So if we take a look at several equations here, so I'm going to kind of divide this. So if we look at this bottom one here, oxyhemoglobin, if there is a rise in hydrogen ions, will release oxygen to the tissues of the body and absorb or attach to the hydrogen ions. So it's basically the hemoglobin releases oxygen, absorbs the hydrogen ions to help buffer the plasma of the blood. In addition, blood cells have lots and lots of this carbonic anhydrase in the inside of the fluids of the intracellular fluids, the cytosol. And what a carbonic anhydrase can do is it can take water and carbon dioxide that's entering into the red blood cell and form carbonic acid, but it also can take that carbonic acid and form hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions, and thus help to establish a balance within the bloodstream. If you have a lot of hydrogen ions, it will combine with bicarbonate, form carbonic acid, and then form carbon dioxide. If you have too little hydrogen ions, then carbonic acid can release hydrogen ions. So we'll talk a lot more about the carbonic anhydrase, carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system in just a few minutes, but I just want to share with you that it is done a lot within the red blood cell. Now this diagram I'm just bringing back. It's one we talked about when we did the respiratory system, and when we talked about the respiratory system, we talked about how the red blood cell can carry gases. So if we take a look at the tissues, so let's look at this diagram down here. Tissues produce a lot of carbon dioxide, but they need a lot of oxygen. That carbon dioxide they produce is going to move into the plasma of the blood. Some of that carbon dioxide will move into the red blood cell, and because of the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system, it can form carbonic acid, which will dissociate into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. Bicarbonate will travel out to the plasma of the blood and shift with chloride. Chloride will come in. That's that chloride shift that we've talked about before. But we can store carbon dioxide as bicarbonate ions. Notice if we form hydrogen ions, though, it will attach to the hemoglobin molecule, and the hemoglobin molecule will release its oxygen to the tissues of the body. So this is a buffering system that helps to well, in this particular graphic, it's showing how we're carrying carbon dioxide, but this carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system is really important at buffering materials within the bloodstream, and especially pH. Now, when blood cells get to when these red blood cells get to the lungs, we want to offload the carbon dioxide and onload oxygen. If we onload oxygen, that disassociates or shifts hydrogen ions off the hemoglobin molecule. That will join with bicarbonate that's coming from the plasma into the red blood cell. Those will join together to form carbonic acid, which will disassociate into water and carbon dioxide, offload the carbon dioxide to the lungs. Okay, so this carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system is really super important at allowing carbon dioxide to be taken into blood cells, into plasma of the blood, and then being offloaded when it's at the right site of the lungs. All right, so let's look at the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system in a little bit more detail. This particular system is really based on the bicarbonate ion, which acts as a weak base, and it focuses on carbonic acid, which acts as a weak acid. If pH falls, that means we're becoming more acidic, bicarbonate will remove hydrogen ions. And it kind of looks like this to form carbonic acid, a weak acid. So if we take a stronger acid, we can make it into a weaker acid if the pH is falling using bicarbonate. If the pH rises, on the other hand, we can take carbonic acid and provide hydrogen ions. So you can see here the carbonic acid is releasing hydrogen ions and thus buffering pH rises. So acid-base imbalances may occur in what we call acidosis. That's where the blood pH is below 7.35. It can occur in alkalosis, where the blood pH is above 7.45. So we do have imbalances that occur all the time. Typically, acidosis is more common because the body is constantly losing acid, constantly making acids in the breakdown of food that we eat, and it's constantly losing base in our feces. All right, so the lungs and the kidneys are really important in this the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system. All right, so let's look at how these things work. So let's look at here's the basic components. We have the components would be carbon dioxide and water. They can shift to carbonic acid. They can shift to hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. And you can see that the lungs will be involved in regulating carbon dioxide level. The kidneys will be involved in regulating hydrogen ion and bicarbonate levels. There is a reserve, a bicarbonate reserve. It's known as sodium bicarbonate, and this can be found in the plasma and interstitial fluids of your blood, but specifically, the plasma is the main place where you're going to see sodium bicarbonate. Okay, sodium bicarbonate can release carbonate ions to aid in this buffering system. So if we take a look at a couple of situations, let me get my cat's tail out of my face. So if we have fixed acids or metabolic acids which are adding hydrogen ions, you can see that we can the sodium bicarbonate buffer or reserve can release carbonate ions. Carbonate ions can attach to those or join with those hydrogen ions, form a weak acid, the carbonic acid, which can disassociate into water and carbon dioxide, and the lungs can remove that carbon dioxide. So that's how the lungs are involved in when we have additions of hydrogen ions. Exhalation of carbon dioxide is going to cause less acid production and a rise in blood pH. So if we get rid of carbon dioxide, that carbonic acid can release carbon dioxide ions, and we'll get a rise in pH. Retaining carbon dioxide, though, leads to more acid production because the carbonic acid that will be formed will release hydrogen ions, and we'll have a drop in pH. So if we look here, this is just the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system. Notice these are reversible reactions. Carbonic anhydrase is the enzyme that's going to cause these reversible reactions. So if we get a rise or a fall in any of these particular things, you can shift to the left or to the right. Now, the kidneys are highly involved in buffering, in using this buffering system and in additional buffering systems. And I just want to talk to you just for a second about the kidney tubule. Inside that kidney tubule, there's a filtrate there, and of course, one of the main jobs of the kidney is to remove hydrogen ions from circulation. In order to remove hydrogen ions from circulation, though, so remove hydrogen ions from the plasma of the blood to the kidney, you have to be real careful, and you have to buffer the hydrogen ions. So if you had too many hydrogen ions just alone inside of the filtrate, you wouldn't be able to keep on adding more and more to them. So in order to keep on adding hydrogen ions to the filtrate to get rid of them from the body, we're going to utilize the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system. We're going to utilize the phosphate buffering system. And we're going to utilize what we call the ammonia buffer system. The ammonia buffer system, located in this panel over here, takes the amino acid glutamine and removes the amino group and allows hydrogen ions to so here we make ammonia from it, and it allows hydrogen ions to stick to that ammonia to form ammonium ions. Okay, so we're utilizing all these buffering systems in order, so as we keep on taking hydrogen ions and pumping it into filtrate to buffer all those hydrogen ions coming into filtrate, we're going to utilize all of these systems to neutralize that. Now on the flip side, if we need to, if we have too much bicarbonate and we need some hydrogen ions to go into the bloodstream, we can use the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffering system to make hydrogen ions that we put into bloodstream, and then the kidney can excrete bicarbonate ions into the filtrate. So that's a little bit more rare than the other situation of getting rid of the hydrogen ions in the filtrate. So respiratory acidosis is something that occurs when the blood pH drops due to excessive retention of carbon dioxide, okay, which means that we're going to form an excess amount of carbonic acid. So respiratory acidosis, if you basically begin to breathe really super slowly, that increases the amount of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream and will cause acidosis to occur. Respiratory alkalosis is a blood pH rise due to excessive loss of carbon dioxide. This occurs in hyperventilation. So if you ever see somebody hyperventilating, they're getting alkalosis, and it'll eventually make them pass out unless you take and give them a brown paper bag that they can breathe into to increase the level of carbon dioxide in their bloodstream. So metabolic acidosis is where we have arterial blood levels arterial blood levels of bicarbonate that are falling, and then metabolic alkalosis is where we have arterial blood levels of bicarbonate which are rising. So acidosis, respiratory acidosis and alkalosis refers to levels of carbon dioxide. Metabolic acidosis and alkalosis refer to blood levels of bicarbonate. So let's look right here at acidosis caused by a rise in hydrogen ions. So if we get a rise in hydrogen ions, we can do several different things. Of course, the reserve can release bicarbonate that can cause carbonic acid to form, and then we can take and remove the carbon dioxide that's formed by using the lungs. We can also take rise in hydrogen ions too. We can use other buffering systems to buffer those, like the protein buffering systems, and we can also use the kidneys to excrete hydrogen ions. So alkalosis, where we have a removal of the hydrogen ions from our reserve, we can utilize several different things. We can take and decrease the respiratory rate, which will increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, which will increase the amount of carbonic acid, and therefore it dissociates and forms hydrogen ions. Other buffering systems can release hydrogen ions. and we can generate hydrogen ions by the kidneys, and we can excrete base by the kidneys. All of that to remove, all of that to get us out of alkalosis. And I just have a couple of graphics here just to kind of reiterate some of the things just by looking at it. But if we have an increase in carbon dioxide, this is going to result in an increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in our bloodstream, which will decrease the pH of the blood. We have receptors that can sense that. Those receptors will increase respiratory rate. They will increase the secretion of hydrogen ions and the generation of bicarbonate ions, and other buffering systems will aid in helping to reestablish the pH again. So all of these things will decrease blood carbon dioxide levels, or partial pressure carbon dioxide levels, and will increase hydrogen and decrease hydrogen ions and increase bicarbonate ions, and we'll have a restoration of that. So that's what happens during respiratory acidosis. Okay, so during respiratory alkalosis, where you have a decrease in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, that will decrease the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood, which will increase the blood pH because carbonic acid is going to be formed. We have receptors that can sense that information. That will decrease our respiratory rate so that we can increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood. Other buffering systems and the kidneys will aid in this process. It will increase the kidneys and buffering systems will increase the hydrogen ion concentration, decrease the bicarbonate concentration. This will restore things back to balance. So if we have metabolic acidosis, then we have a decreased pH because of a decreased amount of bicarbonate. We'll be able to sense that. We'll increase the respiratory rate. The kidneys will generate more bicarbonate and secrete more hydrogen ions. Other buffering systems will accept hydrogen ions. That will decrease the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, or decrease the hydrogen ion, increase the bicarbonate, and restore us back into normal pH. So if we have a decreasing, so if we have metabolic acidosis, where we have decreasing bicarbonate, we're going to sense that in the bloodstream. That decreasing bicarbonate will result in a decreased blood pH, so less bicarbonate is available. We're going to sense that by the receptors. The kidneys will secrete hydrogen ions and generate bicarbonate ions. Other buffering systems are going to donate bicarbonate ions or accept hydrogen ions. We'll have an increased respiratory rate, and this is going to decrease blood carbon dioxide levels, and we're going to have a decrease in pH and an increase in bicarbonate, which will restore us back to blood pH normality. All right, so aging in fluid, electrolyte, and acid homeostasis. So aging has a lot to play in all of these kinds of things. Significant differences will exist between adults and infants in respect to fluid distribution, fluid regulation of fluid and electrolyte balance, and acid-base homeostasis. Differences seem to be due to differences in proportion and distribution of water. There are different metabolic rates, different developmental states the kidneys might be in. Surface area to volume ratio will be different. Breathing rates are different between all of these things, and ion concentrations are different in these individuals. Older adults often have an impaired ability to maintain fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. Basically, the systems slow down, become less functional, and less efficient. Older adults seem to be very sensitive to dehydration and hypernatremia, the inadequate fluid intake and loss of more water than sodium. So basically the bloodstream becomes more has more solutes in it. It seems that older adults often sometimes will seem more susceptible to hypokalemia. This is due to the chronic use of laxatives, drugs, and these cause the loss of potassium ions. So acidosis is also more prevalent in older adults. They have an impaired ability of the lungs and kidneys to compensate for the acid-base imbalances. Okay, well that was a quick little lecture on acid-base electrolyte and fluid balance. And next time I'll see you, and we'll be talking about the reproductive system. So good luck studying and reviewing some of these pretty complex things. I'll see you next time.